I certainly remember reading with great interest the first scientific papers on the chemistry of hallucinogenic drugs. That was very interesting to me. In The Kindness of Women, I describe the central character, a narrator, Jim, taking LSD, as I did myself at about the same time in this house. Something we all had to do, I think, in the mid-60s. It was a piece of real foolishness on my part. But I wasn't expecting the sort of total sort of derailment of my mind that LSD brought about.
They were soon within the body of the forest and had entered an enchanted world. The crystal trees around them were hung with glass like trellises of moss. The long arc of trees hanging over the water seemed to drip and glitter like myriads of prisms. The trunks and branches sheathed by bars of yellow and carmine light that bled away across the surface of the water, as if the whole scene were being reproduced by some overactive Technicolor process. The entire length of the opposite shore glittered with this blurred kaleidoscope.
Domestic life and family life provided the background to the sort of to what must seem to outsiders a very strange group of novels. But I think that background of domesticity and all the excitement of young children is the anchor pinning my imagination to the real world.
I think part of Daddy's writing is all about how normal everything looks, but actually under the surface, it's not at all normal.
I remember him doing the odd strange thing. Like, I remember he sprayed his shoes silver paint one day, and then strolled around Shepperton, and Shepperton being a very kind of bourgeois, boring town, you know, all the local residents, you could imagine, were looking and thinking how weird.
And when it was hot, I remember Daddy once stripping off and walking around the garden naked, which he thought was quite normal. But of course the neighbours all started looking and thinking, gosh, you know, who's that crazy guy next door?
And I'm very glad that I was able to bring up the children myself. And I mean, I often say that, in fact, they brought me up. I mean, I became... In fact, I imagine I had a kind of second childhood. I was able to relive my own lost childhood through them.
I remember one particular point, which was he obviously remembered the very, very bright light in Shanghai, because even on a really hot, beautiful summer day, he would have all the electric lights on in the house. And I sometimes used to say, we don't need the light on. He said, oh, yes, we do. It's got to be brighter.
In fact, my wife caught pneumonia and died in Spain in a matter of hours, tragically. It certainly was sudden. I mean, it was certainly something that no young father, or young mother for that matter, with 2 or 3 children, expects the spouse to suddenly die without any warning. I mean, I felt at the time that, you know, nature had committed a terrible crime against my wife and my children. I mean, I think the death of my wife provided me with a sort of renewed impetus to make sense of the sort of arbitrary cruelty of the world.
A gentle conspiracy existed among my friends and publishing acquaintances, as they feigned not to notice that Miriam had vanished through a window of time and space. This silence reminded me of the cruel childhood game in which we pretended, without telling him, that one of our friends no longer existed. The poor victim would be ignored, stared through, excluded from any games.
Confusion is indescribable. both the President and Governor Connolly are hit. While they are rushed to hospitals, swarms of police and FBI men search for the assassin.
Watching the national mourning of a stricken America after the assassination of President Kennedy, I almost envied his bereaved wife. Every moment of her grief was endlessly replayed and anatomized on television. Her husband's death, like the murder of his assassin, was recapitulated in slow motion, frame by numbered Zapruder frame.
Now the world hears the appalling news. President Kennedy is dead. In a bronze coffin, his body arrives at the airport. Mrs. Kennedy, her dress stained with her husband's blood, rides in the ambulance. Automatically, Mr. Lyndon Johnson...
She wore her blood-spattered skirt, like a scream of rage at the world that had widowed her.
I think it's true that a lot of the sort of machine-like alienated sex that takes place in books like Crash or High Rise is a reflection of my own sort of despair after the death of my wife and the sort of peculiar sort of affectless quality that life in the late 60s began to have, when I think it all began to come apart at the seams.
Yes, yes, yes. No, no, no. Yes, yes.
Each afternoon she would take me into the garden of the trailer park. Undressing herself, she made me memorize the trajectories of her body. After Freud's exploration within the psyche, it is now the outer world of reality which must be quantified and eroticized. Fiction is a branch of neurology. The scenarios of nerve and blood vessel are the written mythologies of memory and desire.
Sensation ruled the late 60s. Nothing mattered unless it... it was like firing an electric current into the leg of a dead frog. All you were looking for was a sort of larger and larger kick. And this kick could be provided by drugs or films of car crashes or pure sensation transmitted through television. The people worried about the sort of violence that's shown on television now obviously have forgotten the sort of commonplace scenes of dreadful violence that was shown on British television during the Civil War in the Congo and the Vietnam War. And all this had a sort of deadening of the emotions. And it seemed to me that one needed to perhaps embrace this world to see what would happen, immerse oneself in the most destructive element, in Conrad's words, and see if one could swim in this new realm.
I discovered the true significance of the automobile crash, the meaning of whiplash injuries and rollover, the ecstasies of head-on collisions. Together we visited the Road Research Laboratory, 20 miles to the west of London, and watched the calibrated vehicles crashing into the concrete target blocks. Later, in his apartment, Vaughan screened slow-motion films of test collisions that he'd photographed with his cinecamera. Sitting in the darkness, we watched the silent impacts flicker. The repeated sequences of crashing cars first calmed and then aroused me. Cruising alone on the motorway, I thought of myself at the controls of these impacting vehicles.
In my early fiction, I was always much more interested in psychological roles than in what we conventionally think of as sort of novelistic characterization. because I was always interested in sort of psychiatric case histories. They seem to me to be closer to the truth